Hello guys, it's your boy Brice, coming up to you today with a content, my very first E7 video. It's gonna be about Expedition 3 Fire, as you can see right there, and it's gonna be a full auto team that I come up with myself. This team can do upwards of 950k all the way to 1.3 million, and with really good RNG, 1.5 million. You almost basically solo it. But like I told you, it's heavily reliant on RNG for those really high numbers, but you are guaranteed at least 9.5 million. Um, and before any ado, let's just jump right to it, showcase the team. So the team consists of Lilias, Luna, TG, and Tamarine. And the way this works is that TG for CR pushing, defense break, Luna for the damage, Lilias for the procs, with her S1 and basically the fast cycling of her S3 into S2. And the main thing with her is that you really want her S1 and her S2. The S2 is priceless in this fight because it gives you barrier 30% of your max health. And this boss, if you're not an ice tank, wrecks you without the barrier. And Tamarine is basically just, the queen of PvE, attack buff, CR pushing, and dual attacks. So there are two phases to this fight. The first phase is basically when the boss has his boss skill ready, he will use it and he will enter a state called offensive posture. In offensive posture, you have to hit him 6 times to remove the attack, the critical hit chance, the critical hit damage, and he has decreased defense during that state. When he is in that state, any CR pushing you do to your team is amplified by 3 times. Basically, 300% of your CR pushing. Your CR pushing becomes amplified by 300%. So a 25 becomes 75, etc. Right? And in that phase, your team is completely silenced. It's nothing but S1 skills. That is why it is very important to have at least one unit that can clear that phase by themselves. In this team, it is basically Luna and Lilias for security, for insurance that at least I'm gonna get 2 hits with her S1. That is why she is a really good unit in this game mode. And TG, obviously, if you proc TG with Lilias, basically your whole team goes down, and you're pretty much Gucci from there. So the reason TG is my slot instead of another DPS unit in this team, even though Luna can clear the first phase, is that if you keep, since Lilias's S1 is random, every time I proc TG, it's basically an up tempo of 25% for the entire team. A good substitute to this is basically Sechuri with Misconfile, and you just turn him off. You CR push your team. Even on his turn, you don't necessarily have to dual attack to him for the CR push. Even on his turn, it's already like a CR push. And he can defense break for Luna. That's all you really need for that slot. As you can see, I started with 300,000. I'm already at 500. So I'm already like halfway there. And every time Tamarine transforms, your up tempo is so high that you're pretty much safe. Here I missed my 6 hits because I did not get a single proc and I was slowed. That's the worst case scenario. That happens 1 out of 6 runs. But as you can see, I barely lived. But since Luna is so far ahead, I'm pretty much okay here if I continue. But as you can see, the whole team is silenced. So I get a dual proc here. Everybody goes down. Another hit. Probably gonna get another hit here. And that's the last one. Tamarine will transform. Heal everybody up. Remove all the speed debuffs. And the damage continues. Lilias uses her S3. This is I consider this a dead turn, but it's a half of a dead turn. The reason is she basically gets 50 CR for free. So it's not that much of a demerit to actually use Lilias. The risky thing about using Lilias in this game mode is really the fact that she's not water. And when you're not water in this fight, this portion of the mechanic really wrecks you. You take 80% more damage when you are not water. And that is scary. So as you can see, bump, Taranor giving himself CR, pushing the entire team, the up tempo. Every time you do S1 with Lilias, it's so much damage. Because if you dual attack with TG, you're CR pushing the entire team. If you dual up with Luna, you're basically pushing her and getting a lot of damage from her. And refreshing your defense break. As you can see, she has defense break right away because of all the CR pushing and all the procs that I'm getting from her via Tamarine and via Lilias. I'm already at 1.1 million now, and it's about to end. So ideally here, you would want your Lilias to be faster. I just don't have the gear. If your Lilias is upwards of 230 and still be able to tank, mind you, that's a very big caveat. If she can still tank, this fight becomes so much easier because at this phase, she can't really do any more damage, and she always ends up using her S3 by the end there. And you would ideally want her to be on full auto using her S1s, but that's just not possible. So in this run, I did 1.2 million. Not the 1.5 crazy run that I had, but it's fairly consistent. So to show you guys the consistency, that was the run we had. I started with 300k prepping for the video, but if you remove that, it's basically 1.2 million. On this run, it was my single entry, 1.28 million on my first try. And on the really bad RNG, it's 9.3. But it was still also just one try. And so it's a fairly consistent, very good, reliable team. If I do say so myself, I've been testing it for a while. And now to explain the unit stats and why I use what I use. So first off, let's start with Lilias. Lilias needs to have high defense in this fight. HP is actually not as important as people think. You need upwards of 18,000, 19 to 18,000, somewhere there. Upwards of that number, that's the minimum. But anything above that isn't actually that important. What's important here is the number of defense you have. Because that boss actually does a portion of your max health as damage while reducing your defense by 60% during the dual hit skill that he does. The first hit ignores defense, and it really takes a chunk of your HP. That is why it is very important to have this artifact. This artifact is a lifesaver. As you can see, I barely lived. And on those situations that I barely live, I live because of this. Speed, you would ideally want 220, but that doesn't really matter. Effectiveness doesn't really matter in this fight. The only thing that really matter is the speed, the health, and the defense. These three. These are the most important stats you will ever want on your Lilias to do that. Next one is Tamarine. Okay, for Tamarine, you need at least 220 speed. If you are less than 220 speed, what will end up happening is that in the worst case scenario, and it happens twice, you will not be able to heal your Lilias in time. If you get speed debuff and you have less than 220 speed, Lilias will basically get mauled to death, even with all the defensive stats that she has, with the artifact and the stats. So it's very crucial to have at least 220. I go for a little bit of safety because you get random CR at the very beginning, and that can turn into play. So I added a little bit more, like 5 speed more. Ideally, you want 230. 230 and you're very much safe. The HP here doesn't really matter because as long as you get your heals out and you cycle your Shining Star, the run becomes really safe. As you can see, I go for like a standard mediocre resist, mediocre effectiveness. I try to balance them both. Ideally, you would want to focus on one, go heavy on effect or go heavy on resist. But I try to go for a balanced build. It doesn't really come into play for this fight, but really the most important part is the 220 speed. The next one is Luna. For Luna, there are a lot of artifacts that are actually very viable. You can go for Victorious Flag. Symbol of Unity is a very cheap alternative. It's free, gives you damage. It affects the entire HP of the boss. Unlike, let's say, if you want to use Portrait of Saviors, it does give more at max. It's 20%, but it's only for the first half of the boss's HP. Now, if you're joining when it's already low, then you're not getting much out of the artifact. The reason I started for Victorious Flag is on the worst case scenario where I do not clear the offensive posture, she is at least a little bit more survivable with the Victorious Flag reduction damage. Another good option is Oberious Tooth. If you're really heavy on attack, this can be really good. The problem with this artifact is that it does not upscale. At max, it will increase your damage for every S1 by 2 to 3,000, maybe 4,000 if you're really heavy on attack. And the last but least option is obviously Hellcutter. This is probably the worst one. But it gives you attack, and your team does cycle really fast, so getting a few percentages here and there. Another good alternative, which is very, very cheap, is Ranon's, but it's a minor upgrade. And my favorite unit of all, Taranor Guard. If you watch me stream, probably use him for every content I do. This guy is literally a god. So the thing with this guy is that you just need him to be fast. Obviously, a lot of effect. The crit chance and crit damage, these are optional. You don't really need this, but if you want, maximum numbers, the stronger your TG is, the more points you get, right? So you get him as strong as you can get the moment you secure the speed. At least upwards of 210, and at least, as much effectiveness as you can, to be honest. Because there are some contents that the effect resist is more than 100. So obviously you probably want to use him for other content too, because he's just that good of a unit. And the artifact, obviously you can also customize this with a little bit of a damage artifact, because Daydream Joker does not work on that boss. But I use him for my Wyvern, so he's using Daydream Joker. And yes, that's the entire team, the entire comp. Hope you enjoy. If you guys want to catch me, you can always catch me on Twitch. It's Twitch TV / Brice Be Nice. Hope to see you guys there. And thank you for watching.